What's up, Guru Nation? Let's demystify clinical research.
Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. If it's not written down and documented, it did not happen. So that's a rule in this industry that's pretty universally held and has stood the test of time. Documentation is so important. If it's not going to be documented, it did not happen. So if it's documented, it's real. And this topic kind of stems from a lot of different discussions I've had with research sites and site owners. And this is one of the topics that we're actually going to be discussing at SOS, Save Our Sites Conference. Get your tickets, by the way, saveoursites.com, February 2nd, 2024. Shameless plug. Documentation's so important, but we're all busy. All of us, CRCs, CRAs, PIs. This is really going to be more about the sites. So if you're a CRA watching this, maybe send it to a site that needs help. But the documentation in this industry is unique because it's so detailed. It needs to be detailed compared to traditional healthcare. For example, just the other day, I'm doing a depression study, and I was doing a psychometric rating scale, and I document details on my notes because I know that if I ever get asked about this particular visit, it's probably not going to be one I remember because we have multiple visits a day now. If you're a coordinator and you don't document something, good luck remembering the specifics of what happened. And the problem with this stuff is the sites that don't document well enough, they're not really audit proof. So audits usually happen years after a visit occurred. And the auditor may not even be FDA, just a sponsor auditor, will have detailed questions about a particular visit. And if you don't have documentation, you're not going to have answers to those questions. And if it's not put in documentation, it did not happen. So there's no way you can remember. This is why ALCOAC is so important. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. We need to be able to tell a story about every visit. Not only do we need to be able to tell a story so that we can answer auditors' questions in the future that we're definitely not going to remember if we didn't document, but we need to be able to paint the picture that our PI has oversight over a study, particularly over the visits. So this topic of documentation is so important because it's so easy when we get busy to forget to complete the visit. And by complete, meaning progress notes, meaning there should be no questions about what the data says, at least on the surface level, but also what it actually means in the context of the protocol and in the context of good clinical practice. All this is documentation. So PI oversight, one of the most important things in the industry, one of the biggest findings of the FDA audits is lack of PI oversight. So how do you battle that? How do you overcome this? Documentation. It's the only way. And one of the reasons why I like Creo, which is a sponsor of this show, or however you want to document it, doesn't matter. You can use paper, you can use eSource. Doesn't matter as long as you document properly. But Creo, the technology is actually making it easier to prove this documentation. PI oversight, no problem. Click of a button, PI signs off on the visit. But it goes further than that. And this is where it doesn't matter if it's electronic or paper. Having a progress note or having a PI's footprint over every visit, even if it is just a signature that I reviewed the visit and I attest that it's complete and accurate. Signing lab results, signing EKGs contemporaneously doing a physical exam when you have to do it contemporaneously, doing adverse events, um, significance of the adverse events, causality of the adverse events, safety ramifications of the adverse events, con meds related to the adverse events, study eligibility around medical history. These medical histories are complex in some patients. These inclusion exclusion criteria are complex. The documentation, good documentation, is the only way you can be safe if you ever get audited. I tell my staff, over document. I rather you over document than under document, because no one's going to really fault you for documenting too much. Now, you got to be careful what you document, because the more you document, the more potential mistakes you can make. However, I'd rather have that than too little documentation for a number of reasons. Patient safety is number one, but number two, we discussed eligibility, and number three, it's really PI oversight. So those three facets are what's super important about documentation. And you might say, well, PIs are busy. They're even busier than coordinators. How are they going to have time to write a progress note for every visit? They don't have to. The coordinator can actually write a narrative of what the PI did. PI met with patient. PI met with patient to go over questions about the study. The more detailed you can write these notes, the better. And then your PI can sign off on it at the end of the visit. That doesn't take almost any time. The PI can just review the visit, and in CREO, it's really easy, but in a paper source study as well, it doesn't matter where you do it. The source in this way doesn't matter. The tech does help, which is why I'm a huge fan of CREO, but it doesn't have to be CREO. This is a tech agnostic concept. This is a concept that way too many sites, mine included, underestimate the importance of it, but you are thankful that you did document later on when you needed it. Like my example recently that I opened this video with, when I started out doing a depression rating scale on a patient. A month later, the sponsor wants to review my rating. Now, between that time, I've done dozens of visits, not to mention all the other stuff going on in my life, these podcasts, interviews, other businesses. How am I going to remember this particular patient on this particular visit? I'm not. But what did I do? I went back to the documentation and I read it. And I read it out loud to the sponsor on the Zoom call. They actually even said at the end of the call, "Thank you for documenting. It's really detailed. I wish more sites did this." This is like a wake-up call, not just for me, but for everyone else. Like, it's always worth it to document. And you want to document, especially if your PI is busy. You want to document, because how is your PI going to have oversight if he or she reads the visit later on that day when they're done with clinic and there's nothing really to read? There's just vital signs, labs were done, but where's the details? What actually happened? Paint the picture, paint the narrative. Every visit has a story. Every visit has a narrative. And even my staff, I constantly urge them, write more detailed notes. Every visit's different. Maybe you didn't ask the patient enough questions if you don't have enough details. What's going on? How are they feeling? Oh, they're having nightmares? That's potentially an adverse event. Why are we not documenting these things? So there's just a lot. I think this is hopefully it's a call to action for most of my colleagues out there that are sites to document more and to really pay attention to documenting, because I know at the end of the day we're all running businesses and we all want to get the visits done and have the PI sign off on it. But what good is reviewing a visit if there's no detailed description of what happened? And even my coordinators, when I tell them make sure you document, they still just write a few sentences, and sometimes that's adequate, but it's not detailed enough. And I'm almost at the point where every assessment should have at least a sentence or two. Some of them will have more about what happened. Now, we're not doing that yet, but at least we're seeing progress notes at every visit, because I've monitored sites where there are no progress notes. There's just papers with vital signs and lab results, and that's the bare minimum, but doesn't tell you anything about what's actually going on. How do we know the patient didn't have AEs? Well, if it's documented, patient reported no AEs, okay, now we know. How do we know that the patient is compliant? Well, the only way to know is to go look at that bottle and count the pills. But if you're an auditor, do you really want to be doing that? Or should you rather just read it in the notes and say, okay, patient reported they missed one dose in the last 2 weeks. Now you can go to the bottle when you do IP accountability, and you can count and you can confirm, yes, one dose was missed. Or maybe 2 doses were missed, and then the documentation's wrong. And then you can go back as the site and put a late entry that it was a data entry error. The patient was actually missed 2 doses, not 1. That's okay, but to not put anything doesn't help anyone out, including the site. So it sounds like it's more work by asking you to document. It sounds like the equivalent of someone telling you to eat more vegetables and work out more if you want to get in shape. But it really is the only way to prove good oversight and good safety oversight for the patient, and it makes your PI's life a lot easier. So again, I haven't implemented this at my site, but I might eventually just say I want to note at least a sentence for every assessment that occurred. And Creo this is why I like eSource, because it kind of paints this narrative for you already, because everything is stamped what time it was done. So it's contemporaneous. Everything has a timestamp, a signature stamp for who did it. So if it's vital signs, you don't actually need to write the time because it's already being recorded automatically for you. But let's say you're putting the vitals at the same time as you're collecting medical history, which is common. A lot of these assessments are done simultaneously. Someone's weighing the patient, but you're also asking them how they're feeling, or you're doing someone's blood pressure, and after the reading, you're actually asking them, well, what medications are you on? What medical conditions did you have? What's your surgical history? So a lot of these things, the times will overlap. And for purposes of EDC, that might cause queries. But if you document patient during the vital signs, after the blood pressure was taken, immediately after, at this time, patient was asked about their surgical conditions. And this is what they said about their hernia surgery in 2012. I mean, that's a very detailed progress note. And you cannot have enough of those, because the majority of sites are writing way too few progress notes. A shockingly large number of sites put no progress notes for visits. It's just signatures everywhere. And while that's the bare minimum, it's not going to do very well in an audit. This is especially important. It's important at every visit, but it's especially important at screening visit, randomization visit, and early termination or completion visits. Those 3 visits, especially important. Not that the other visits are not, because a critical AE or SAE may have happened at one of the visits, or a change in a con med may have happened in one, or a deviation may have happened in one. But at screening visit, it's the informed consent, and it's not just enough to say, yes, patient signed informed consent, here it is. What's the process of the informed consent? And if you have a checklist of they were in a private room, they were given a copy of the informed consent, all their questions were answered, they were made aware that their participation is voluntary, they were made aware that they could withdraw at any time, they were made aware of alternative treatment options. That's fine if it's a checklist, I would still go ahead and write a narrative. Who did it? What did they say? Every patient has unique questions they ask or unique statements they make. We just screened a patient a week ago, I remember, because I was in the room doing the consent with them. And they said, hey, I'm going to be going on vacation for the holidays for 2 weeks. Can I still do the study? And we told them, yes, you can. We're going to work around your schedule. I wrote it down as a note. Why did I write it down? Not only does it show that it was a unique event, so we're not just copying and pasting the same process of consent for everyone. So it shows some accuracy, it shows contemporaneousness. But when the patient actually does go out of town, I have documented proof that we already knew about this. So when it does happen, let's say there is a 1 or 2 day out of window deviation, we will say, yes, we already knew about this. We documented it. If you can, take the extra step of emailing your CRA or medical monitor. Hey, patient will be out of town for the holidays. There's a possibility there might be an out of window deviation. Is that okay? Like most of the time, there's never going to be an issue, 99% of the time. But you have documented proof now that it happened. So if you ever get audited by the FDA, the IRB, the sponsor, I mean, some of these auditors, they're nasty people. Like they're not going to come in there and be your friend. They're going to come in there and look, are you documenting? Oh, well, how do we know that you knew the patient was going to be out of window? It shows that you didn't re-educate the patient. So screening, process of consent is important in making sure that there's a unique event that you could document. Also eligibility, and this is where medical history comes in. This is where emails to the medical monitors come in handy, because a lot of these protocols, the inclusion exclusion is written in a way that it's confusing. It's a little bit ambiguous. There seems to be like some arbitrary way of certain people getting in and qualifying and others not. This is where you put it all on the hands of the sponsor and say, medical monitor, what's your documented response to my question about patient having this condition, but it being stable? Are they allowed in the study? Because the protocol says this. This is my rationale for why I'm asking. You're going to always get a response. And that response is your proof that it's okay. We had a recent example of this with a BMI. That patient was 1 point above the allowed BMI. We asked the medical monitor, hey, everything else matches except this. Medical monitor came back and said, it's okay. It's a deviation, but it's okay. We have that email in the source. I would even take it a step further. When you randomize the patient, write an extra note in case that email gets lost somehow, or the auditor doesn't want to click a few extra buttons to find it, or in the case of physical source, doesn't want to move a few extra papers around to find it. Write it out in the progress note. Medical monitor on this date replied that it's okay to randomize. That's it. That one sentence can make or break the outcomes of your audit. You want to make life easy as possible for your CRAs in order to get paid faster, guys and gals and site owners, and also to make your audits go as smooth as possible. Medical history, super important. Obtaining medical records, super important. This is documentation as well. You want to be able to get the major inclusion exclusion criteria, if not all of it, at least the major ones, documented proof from their medical history, whether it's a pharmacy record or whether it's an encounter at their doctor's office, that they qualify for the study. And you want to document that in a progress note as well. Same thing with randomization. One more final QA, QC check. Does the patient actually qualify? PI says yes, sub-I says yes, even if the PI doesn't have time to write a note. Coordinator can write it and say PI agreed. At the end of the visit, the PI can just sign off on it. That's it. That's oversight. Anytime there's a reconsent, same thing. Process of consent needs to be documented again. And I know because I'm a coordinator also, we get busy, but you're going to save yourself more work in the long run by documenting better in the short run. Same thing with early term visits. I stress on my coordinators. Early term or completion. Write a sentence. Patient was referred back to their primary care provider or specialist. Whatever the case is, you're not just leaving the patient on their own now after they're in a study and after treatment. So after study treatment's over, document that they've been referred back to their PCP or their specialist, and actually give the patients a copy of their lab results and anything else they ask for. Give it to them. Their informed consent. Their physicians need to be informed, and make sure it's all documented, or you got it. It didn't happen. That's it. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Thank you so much for watching. Let's document better. Bye-bye.